Hi, I'm Orland Park Mayor Dan McLaughlin. There's been much discussion regarding the use of heroin and other drugs lately. We want everyone to know that the Village of Orland Park and its police department remain on the front lines of this battle. The police department has put together the following program, and we invite everyone to learn more about how we can all work together to combat this problem.
Hello and welcome to Orland Park InFocus. I'm Jerry Hughes. This is the third segment of a three-part series we've introduced in the Village of Orland Park for an open discussion on the drug use, but particularly heroin, by young people in our community. If you're a returning viewer, we want to welcome you back. If you haven't seen our first or second sessions yet, we welcome you as well, but encourage you to find segments 1 and segments 2 on the Orland Park Municipal Television Station, or you could also find all three segments where they're available on the Village of Orland Park website. They're readily available for you to click and find them at any time you would like to watch them. We encourage you to catch all three. In the segment today, we focus on addiction intervention. And today we have a panel of experts with us whose backgrounds are intervention. And we'll have some frank and honest discussions about when families should consider seeking this type of help. I'd like to begin our discussion with an introduction of our panel, and I'd like to welcome David Lee. David is a board-registered interventionist and certified addiction counselor who's also the founder of Intervention Services and Technologies Incorporated. David and his company have been providing drug and alcohol interventions for families for 10 years. Welcome, David. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Mike Verde is the president and founder of Family First Interventions of Orland Park. Mike holds a bachelor's of addiction counseling and has been doing interventions for 7 years. I want to welcome our panel. Mike, also, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you.
I'd like to start our discussion as part of your introduction by mentioning to our viewers that your companies are nationally recognized. Your work is nationwide. While you have experience in Orland Park, it's important to note that you do receive calls from across the country. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
You do. So it's a very interesting perspective, and we really appreciate you being here today. And to begin our conversation, our little discussion here, I want to talk a little bit about, because so much has been said in our community about the heroin use, and has use increased over a period of time. In our other two segments, it's been important for us to look at that question as we first started, because people want to know what's really happening. David, can I ask you, for example, can you talk a little bit about, from your perspectives, where you see the heroin situation in the last few years from your experience?
Sure. About 10 years ago, I would say about 20% of the calls that we got were from family members that had a son or a daughter that was abusing opiates or heroin. Now, 10 years later, that number has increased probably 5 to 10-fold. I mean, it's the majority of the calls that we get now are for people that are abusing heroin, and they're usually within an age bracket of anywhere from 17 to 25. The majority of the calls that we get are from that group. And interestingly enough, like with Orland Park, they're almost all middle to upper middle class suburbs, whereas 10 years ago it was city, that kind of thing. So nowadays the suburbs, the middle to upper middle class suburbs, are the ones that are exponentially increasing. The kids nowadays are experimenting with heroin and getting hooked really, really quickly. So,
Mike, do you think that's common in the collar counties around Chicago? Has it been similar throughout the suburbs? In our second segment and our first segment, we talked a little about some of the statistics we've been seeing that collar counties seem to have a similar experience. Are you finding that in your work as well?
Oh, I do. I think that the entire Chicago metro area is facing the same exact problems. You know, from all the way down here in Orland Park, all the way up to the Wisconsin-Illinois border up in Zion. You know, we get calls from people as far as up there. I think there's just a lure to the city. You know, heroin is cheap. It's $10, and anybody that can get a hold of 10 or 20 bucks and the keys to a car and access to an expressway can get down to the parts of Chicago that sell it and get what they need.
Okay. Well, Moving on, I think people are probably wondering a lot about this process, and I think particularly about the people whose families find themselves in these kinds of situations. They're wondering a lot about how these systems work and how they can employ your services. I'd like to talk a little bit about what intervention is, what your services are like. If you could give us a little insight in what is an interventionist and how does intervention come about. David, could you tell us?
Yeah. Ideally, an interventionist is a professional, usually a certified addictions counselor or somebody that has some form of certification. They've usually worked in the field of addictions. They may or may not have had a background in an addiction themselves. Perhaps they're in recovery. Most importantly, they're a professional that comes out and facilitates the intervention. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what an intervention is. A lot of people think that we come out and kind of bully somebody into treatment, or we shame them in, or we throw them out. That's not really true. What usually happens is you'll have a family that has a kid, and they either just find out something that shocks them. Oh my God, I just found out there were some pills, or I found a needle, or I heard he was using drugs, and they're concerned, so they reach out for help. And they call us because when they talk to their kid about it, the kid was either in denial, I didn't do it, it was a friend's, or they admit it, but they're adamantly opposed to getting any kind of help for it. I'm not that bad, I don't need to see a therapist, I don't need to go to treatment. And what our job is we come out, and 9 out of 10, over 90% of the time, we increase the willingness of the client and get them to go from, I'll never go to rehab, I don't have a problem, to, well, thank you family for coming together and making the conditions right so that I can make this a step up instead of a step down. And then in most cases they enter into treatment, and we help them to come up with some kind of a plan. So,
Mike, can you talk a little bit about what the process looks like, a little more detail of how you get involved with families and where it all begins and how you make your first contact? People will probably be a little interested in how this comes about.
How the first contact is made, they usually find us on the internet through referral or word of mouth from past referrals or treatment centers. And we usually start off by reaching out to the family, and or they reach out to us because, again, they found us online. And it always starts with the initial phone consultation. And the hard part about the job is that the first person calling is usually ready to go, but there's several other family members behind the scene that we usually have to have brought in to get them on board. The biggest problem that I have with scheduling interventions is getting the family on the same page. But once we do that, counselor heads out to the home. Most of the time it is the surprise of an intervention. It's not the invitational, it's a case-by-case basis. But we'll meet with the family prior to the meeting with the addict or the alcoholic that'll be going to treatment and get them prepared. We go through all sorts of steps, education, enabling, family system, consequences. Families, most popular question, what if they say no? So we have to cover all of that. And then the next day is the intervention where that person will face the family. 9 out of 10 times they do say yes, at which time we will escort them to the facility. And the facility is arranged prior to us even starting the intervention. So when they do say yes, we know exactly where they're going, how they're getting there, who's taking them, etc.
For those families that are out there, they have various levels of concern with this problem. Maybe they feel or suspect that a young family member may be involved, or maybe they have reason to suspect, or maybe they know and they're trying to do something about it. When is the appropriate time for them to seek the kind of services of an interventionist, and when is the right time, or what are the signs? When should they know that it's time to make that move and it's time to reach out for your kind of help?
Well, most families unfortunately reach out much later than they should. A lot of times they'll discover that there's some issue. We'll use heroin as an example. They'll find out that their kid has been taking Vicodins or taking prescription pills, and maybe he's been taking it for a month or so. He's been just experimenting. And the family looks at the situation, and instead of intervening on it, they have a conversation, and the kid says, well, I'll never do it again. The problem with that is that the progression of opiate addiction is so fast that within a few months, this experimental use is going to flip into full-blown chronic use. So within 6 months, this kid is now addicted to heroin. So this family that discovered it, what we're getting, the majority of these calls that is unique now versus 10 years ago is the families are so surprised at how fast it happened. A year ago, he never drank. A year ago, he never did anything. I did notice a change about 6 months ago, but I kind of blew it off. And now monies are disappearing. He's not showing up. And I've heard from his friends that now he's experimenting with heroin. If a kid begins experimenting with heroin at the age of 17, usually with any opiates, pills, Vicodin, Oxycontin, usually within 6 months they're usually using heroin. Within a year they're usually IV. And that's over 50% of the cases. So that's, you know, the biggest thing is the speed at which. So when should a family call? If you suspect something, the reality is it's probably happening. Because if you as a family are so emotionally involved with this, are putting up your own denial systems, if you suspect some things, you're seeing 1 out of 10 signs that when we show up, our job is to put all the pieces together and help you to understand that this is much more serious. We get families many times that will say, he's only been using for 3 months. Well, we as professionals always know that it's usually going to be at least double that. When we come out and we get the friends together and we gather this whole loving friends and family team, everybody's got a piece of the pie. And when we put it together, the family goes, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was so bad. So,
Mike, I've heard this in our second segment. There was much talk about how different it is. Alcohol, marijuana, the opiates and heroin are a whole new game with, you know, in regards to treatment and seeking help soon. Can you speak a little bit to the opiates and heroin? What is it about those types of drugs that make it so different from alcohol and marijuana? Is it the addiction cycle? What specifically, is there anything we can explain to our viewers that is different about these drugs? It changes so much in the way treatment is done?
Well, I think opiates in and of themselves are probably one of the most addictive substances. I think they're less expensive than most other drugs, but I think the biggest fear is the risk of overdose when people take them. I mean, nobody overdoses from their first beer or their first even hit of crack or first line of Coke. I mean, it only takes one hot bag that's laced with the wrong drugs that can cause overdose and death. You know, with opiates, there's like this, there's just this draw now with young people where it's almost cool to be a heroin addict, and it's not. You know, I'm a recovered heroin addict, and I can tell you it's not cool. You know, waking up every day, being sick, and just chasing that high and trying to figure out where you're going to get $10 is not cool. And in the beginning, these kids, it starts off as fun. They get the group of guys, they send the guy into the city, they come back with the drugs, and it's fun. But like what David was saying, within 3 months, they're waking up with the flu-like symptoms, and they're hooked. And with opiates, I mean, you know, people don't get, you know, physically addicted to stimulants like crack and meth. Whereas with opiates, you get physically addicted as well as mentally. So you're not only, you know, hooked on it like nicotine, but you're also a physical slave. I mean, if you don't have the drugs, you could barely function. I mean, I woke up every day with like amazing flu-like symptoms. And I think that's the biggest difference, because heroin addicts, opiate addicts, they always use the, you know, I don't want to get sick, I don't want to kick theory. You know, their biggest fear is I don't want to be unwell. Whereas, you know, people who smoke crack and meth, not that those drugs aren't as bad because they are, they can just stop, sleep for 5 days and then carry on. An opiate addict doesn't have that luxury. You don't get your fix within 4 to 8 hours. You're sweating, you're sick, you're bedridden, your joints hurt, and you're willing to do anything you can for $10.
So it's truly different. It truly has changed things quite a bit.
There's no question. Absolutely.
the progression, you know, it's about a 20-year cycle for alcohol to get to the chronic stage. It's about 2 years with opiates. And that's the thing. Whereas, you know, and a lot of times parents, we judge our kids in high school kind of compared to when we were in high school. We think back when we were in high school, well, I experimented with marijuana, I drank a bit on the weekends, and I know who those drug people are because I remember them when I was in, you know, 20 years ago in high school. And we tend to pigeonhole our kids today based upon our ideas from the past. But everything is different now. This is not the days of the 70s and the 80s. Everything is different. There are designer drugs. They hook you faster. The image of an addict today versus what it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was pretty obvious. It was kind of the long-haired, kind of hippie-looking guy. We knew that that guy probably had some drug problems. Nowadays, when you go into a high school, they're usually above-average students. They may or may not be involved in athletics. They're popular. Their families are either middle class or upper middle class. Interestingly enough, in many cases, the more affluent the family, the greater the risk for opiate abuse. So when families look at their kids, they automatically pigeonhole them as either, well, this is just a phase. But the reality is in that 6-month phase, your son or daughter very well may become physically dependent to a substance that they will spend the rest of their lives trying to undo. In and out of detoxes, in and out of jails, trying to fix a stupid mistake that they made when they were 17. If the parents of today, back in the 70s, experimented with opiates the same way they did with alcohol and maybe marijuana, they would become physically dependent back then. But those drugs were not available back then. Now everything is available.
You know, in the 7 years that I've been doing this and in the 10 years I was an addict, I've never once met, seen, or heard of a social opiate user. You're either all in or you're not. So when families think, well, he's just dabbling, that's such a short-lived moment, the first 3 months, because then after that, you're either all in or you're not. It's not like some people can socially drink and some people are alcoholics, some people can just smoke weed, some people can't. Opiates is you're all in or you're not. There's no this, well, he just uses sometimes. If that's what he's telling you or she's telling you, they're probably lying.
So it's probably fair to say then, when it comes to opiates and heroin, almost the first sign or the first good suspicion, seek help.
Seek help.
Don't wait.
Absolutely.
Time is critical.
You
It's
absolutely
critical.
have to reach out to some outside source. I don't care if it's a therapist or a school counselor or our services, or call an intervention provider, call a treatment center. You have to reach out for help. We recommend in many cases when there's doubt, families need to have the truth. So if your child is living in your home, I don't care what age they are, drug test them. Offer to take a drug test if there's doubt. And when it tests positive for something like that, then you have to take some action. And the action can't be a simple conversation. If somebody living in your home is tested positive for any form of drugs, then there is a drug problem. And the level of which we need to handle that, well, there's assessments that are done. Not everybody needs to go to a full-blown long-term inpatient facility. But what we're finding is that with younger kids and opiates, we're recommending longer term right away, because we don't want that addiction to latch on. It's so fast. Kids at 19 are farther along in their progression than a 50-year-old alcoholic who's been drinking for 30 years. So we have to treat them almost the same as if they had been using for that long.
I can imagine there's some families that are very hesitant and find it difficult to take this step and to reach out. Can we talk a little bit about what are some stumbles or some barriers to intervention and to reaching positive treatment? What are some of the things in your experience that keep families from seeking help from an interventionist, for example, and what can we say to make people, families understand those barriers can be overcome?
The biggest one is guilt. It's hard to wake up one day and discover that your son or daughter is using drugs. It's kind of, what did I do wrong as a parent? And there's that guilt. You don't want to, call up your buddy from work and say, hey, I just found out my kid's using drugs. So you keep it a secret. You don't really want to reach out to strangers and present this problem. It's almost like they feel like it's a reflection on themselves. So the guilt that's there, usually they want to then handle it and fix it themselves. And a lot of things pop up, some denial systems. They almost always minimize it. They almost always want to kind of say, well, maybe this is just a phase. So guilt is probably the biggest one. What did I do wrong? And then they're concerned that when we show up, we're going to kind of do an inventory on their family and say, well, because your mom drinks a glass of wine every night, then she's the reason why, or dad didn't hug him enough. And that's not actually what an intervention's about. An intervention is we lift this whole family up and we remove a lot of that stuff and empower them so that they operate as a group. But guilt is probably the big one. Fear.
Fear is a huge. Fear is absolutely, I think, one of the biggest ones. What if they say no if we intervene? And I think a lot of families, they think that if they just have them in their life the way that they are, they'd rather have that than to not have them in their life at all. They think that if we intervene or if we try to get them some help, they'll run away, they'll threaten suicide, they'll never see their family again, etc. And I know, like my mom and dad, they waited a long time. My family thought that if I just met that right girl, or if I just got that right job, or if I just got arrested or something significant enough happened, I would be smart enough to snap out of it. And that's not how it works. Addicts and alcoholics, we don't think in the midst of our addictions the way that normal people think. We think for that second. We don't think long-term solution. So when things like that happen, we deal with it and then we move on. And in families, just the fear component. What if they say no? What if we try this and they get worse? What if they run away and we never see them again? That's got to be one of the biggest ones. And families just get terrified that their son or daughter's gonna die if they do this, and they just, if they don't keep doing what they're doing, things will get worse. And that's really not true.
I think to tag onto that, I think with a lot of families, they unfortunately they have the mistaken belief that only addicts go to rehab. And they're so afraid of, well, why should my son have to go to rehab? That's for addicts. And we just found out he's been experimenting for the last month. He doesn't need to go there because that's what that place is for. And the reality is, in many cases, a residential treatment facility or an outpatient facility is about prevention. It really is about trying to prevent them from getting into a full-blown or a chronic addiction. And most families, unfortunately, wait until they're way past the level of addiction before they actually address it.
So there's some fear there of a labeling type thing where
absolutely.
A family member's afraid their loved one will be labeled as an addict, and they hesitate for that purpose in a lot of ways.
Who wants to say that they raised an addict? It's actually like that, because with that you look back on, where did I go wrong? What did I do? What did I not do? You can't help but be that way as a parent. And the thing is that treatment facilities they're about a lift up. Like I've said before, it really is, there's counseling there. It's about empowering the client and giving them tools so that they can, get into healthier behaviors, They
don't want to have to explain where their son or daughter's been for 3 months or 2 months. Some families even think like going to rehab is like all of a sudden now they're a convicted felon. Well, this will be stamped on their permanent record because they went to rehab, and that's not true.
Mike, it occurs to me that there's a certain amount of family members out there that may have a cost concern. They may feel that they don't have the resources financially to support an intervention or an in-house treatment program. What's your experience in that regard, families finding a way to cover the cost of these types of treatments? Any thoughts on that?
Most families have private health insurance that covers the treatment. I know myself and David, of course, we'll work with any family to help them make it work with their finances if it's something that they can't do. But for the most part, insurance will pay for it. And there's so many resources out there. And like when we had talked earlier, the call to one of us is free. The consultation is free. To pick up the phone and talk to David or I or one of our staff members is absolutely free. But as far as getting them the help that they need, if the family listens to what we say and they follow our direction, most of the time, if not all the time, we can get them some level of care, even if they don't have a lot of money. But I would just pretty much think that most of the insurance policies are going to cover some level of treatment.
Mm-hmm. And even those that don't have the money, many clients have this mistaken idea that if they had $1 billion, then they could more adequately help their child. And nothing really could be further from the truth. They look at some of these super glamorous facilities and curse themselves because they don't have $40,000. We really have 3 segments of people that we do interventions on. Those that financially have the means to pay for it out of pocket, and that's the lowest percentage of people that call us. Not everybody has that kind of money. Then there's the people that have insurance. They're usually middle class or whatever have you. And then there's the group that realistically doesn't have any kind of financial means. They don't have much of anything. They're lucky if they can scrape together a few $100s. And we help all 3 segments of that. And what I think one of our strongest suits is that our job isn't just to go out there and get somebody's agreement to treatment. Our job is to facilitate this entire process and find out and discover. We're nationwide service, so we know a lot of resources that normal people wouldn't necessarily know. There are a lot of low-cost and free options. Within the city of Chicago, there are many different options out there. You know, are you going to get a mint on your pillow and a Malibu view? Probably not, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's conducive to long-term recovery either.
But we certainly shouldn't let cost concerns be a hindrance
Never.
to seeking treatment. It's
Never.
certainly not, it obviously doesn't seem to be the problem that I've heard from parents, their concerns about it. So I think that does allay some fears that that doesn't necessarily have to be one of the barriers any more than anything else we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
No, most of the time they end up in an extended sober living house where they obtain employment and pay for the treatment themselves. Doesn't cost the family any money, maybe just to cover the first 2 weeks of rent, but outside of that, we have a lot of options for them.
You know, as our time winds down here, we've talked about a lot of information. I think it's very useful. I think we could probably go on for another half an hour or so. But what I'd like to think about for a moment, if I could ask you both to reflect a little bit about our community and the community at large that may see this program and the various concerns that are out there. What parting thoughts do you have, or what takeaways do you want to leave our viewers with? What are your, in your, you know, your vast experience in intervention in your personal lives in these issues, what would we tell families that have these types of concerns? David, you want to start
Sure.
off by giving us some thoughts?
I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that families experience is that they believe because they have a strong emotional connection and a history with their child that they are the best equipped to be able to fix the situation. And the exact opposite is true. The stronger the emotional connection you have with somebody that you want to personally intervene on, the more impossible it is going to be for you to do it. So my suggestion is that if you suspect there is an issue, you have to reach out to an outside source that is objective to the situation. And the second thing is you have to operate as a group. If you decide to go solo, if you want to just have this one-on-one conversation with your son or daughter to try and fix it, it will usually backfire on you. And then you'll end up having to call in professionals. Call a treatment facility, they'll talk to you, free assessment. Call us as a service. We'll talk to you. I'll talk to you all day long. I get 90% of the calls that we receive, we give free advice, and that's really what it is. So
That's good to know. Mike, your thoughts?
You don't have to wait for them to want it or hit bottom. I know a lot of families call various treatment centers, therapists, doctors, psychiatrists, and they're continuously told nothing can be done unless their loved one wants help or hits bottom, and that's not true. You know, my family waited 10 years for me to want help and hit bottom, and you know, they did an intervention on me. And because of that, I know that's why I'm well today. You know, they don't have to sit back and wait. You know, we define bottom as jails, institutions, and death, and then we tell families that's what they have to wait for. It's never made any sense to me.
I think it's an important point to make out and to focus on. A really important piece of your information was not only will you come out as an interventionist, but you'll take calls from people with concerns. Mm-hmm. I think that's an amazing piece of information for our viewers to know that your services are available free of charge for counseling and advice, and all they have to do is call and sort through some of these issues, and that's really good information. We're going to run your numbers at the end of this segment. We're going to show those numbers, and I would tell our viewers to get pens ready because you have some very valuable information for families that find themselves concerned with these types of issues, because it's got to be a very difficult time for families that are looking for this type of help. Well, our time is just about running out, and I want to thank you for being with us. It's been a very interesting, frank discussion, and again, I think we could probably go on for a lot longer. There's a lot to be said and a lot of concerns to be had, but thank you both for being here. It's been a great discussion, and we look forward to continue contact in our community with people like you to help us work through these problems. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Drew.
We're just about out of time. To close our third segment, I would remind you that these segments are all three available on the Orland Park Municipal Television Station and the Village of Orland Park website as well. Additionally, you can find some additional resources, information, links to other contact numbers and information you can use on the Village of Orland Park website. Thank you for being with us. I hope you'll stay informed and communicate with people who are there to help us through these problems in our community. Thank you for being here. This is Orland Park in Focus, and my name is Jerry Hughes.